On a luxurious farm, a rich man watches his illegitimate daughter playing innocently in the field, his cold eyes calculating the perfect moment. With deliberate movements, he heads to the kennel and, without thinking twice, opens the door of the fiercest dog on his property, an animal trained to attack without hesitation. The dog runs toward the girl as if she were easy prey, its muscles tense and wild eyes fixed on the defenseless child. When the animal approaches and begins to bare its teeth, ready to make the fatal strike, a majestic white horse appears out of nowhere, jumping the fence with impressive agility. What this brave animal does to the fierce dog in the next few seconds leaves everyone in complete shock and exposes the most disturbing truth about a father. Before we begin, if you, like us, love animals, subscribe now so you don't miss any moving stories. Thank you. Now, back to our story. The golden afternoon sun painted the fields of the estate in honeyed tones, creating a landscape that seemed plucked from a dream. Amidst the wildflowers dancing in the gentle breeze, a 6-year-old girl ran barefoot, her brown hair flying like silk ribbons. Sophia laughed with the purity that only children possess, chasing colorful butterflies that seemed to play hide-and-seek among the daisies. Her blue eyes shone with the innocence of one who still believes the world is made only of good things. She didn't understand why she lived in the small cottage at the back of the property, far from the imposing mansion that rose on the horizon like a fairy tale castle. To Sophia, it was just another one of the adult's mysteries, like so many others that populated her childish world. The property stretched for acres, surrounded by verdant pastures where majestic horses galloped freely. It was an empire built on blood, sweat, and an ambition that knew no bounds. Every stone of that place whispered stories of power and money, but also held dark secrets that only the night winds dared to tell. On the mansion's veranda, a figure watched the girl with eyes that did not reflect paternal love, but something far more sinister. Edward Caldwell adjusted the cuff of his Italian shirt, his face, as if carved from cold marble, maintaining a calculating expression. At 45, he had built an empire that extended far beyond these lands. Hotels, restaurants, investments, everything bore his name and his impeccable reputation. But that child, playing innocently among the flowers, represented a crack in his perfect facade, a crack that threatened to destroy everything he had fought for. His new wife, Helena, had made it clear from the first day of their marriage that she would not tolerate complications from the past in her life as a socialite. The message had been delivered with the subtlety of a high society lady, but the firmness of an ultimatum. Sophia stopped running and looked toward the mansion, waving timidly at the distant figure. Her small heart still held the naive hope that one day that man would call her his daughter, that he would hug her as she saw other fathers do with their children in town. But Edward just looked away, pretending not to have seen the gesture. The wind changed direction, bringing with it a different scent, no longer the sweet perfume of the flowers, but something heavier, more threatening. Sophia frowned, her childish intuition picking up on something her mind couldn't yet name. It was as if nature itself were holding its breath. Carmen, the elderly governess who cared for Sophia, had gone into town to pick up prescriptions. The girl was alone, as she often was, but today something was different. The silence seemed deeper, more charged with expectation. Even the birds had stopped singing. It was then that a sound cut through the air like a sharp blade, a ferocious, savage bark that made Sophia's blood run cold. She turned slowly, her eyes widening in terror. From the other side of the field, a huge dog was charging toward her, its bared fangs glinting in the golden sunlight. The animal was a beast of dark fur, muscles coiled with fury, its eyes bloodshot with a primal rage. It was no longer the disciplined guard dog she knew from a distance. It was something transformed by the most basic instinct of hunt and destruction. Sophia tried to run, but her little legs couldn't compete with the speed of the approaching predator. Each bark seemed to echo like thunder in her ears, each passing second shrinking the distance between her and the jaws that promised pain. On the mansion's veranda, Edward watched the scene with an expression he believed to be one of horror, but his eyes betrayed a sinister satisfaction. Everything was happening exactly as planned. In a few moments, his complication would be just a tragic memory, a regrettable accident that no one could question. But fate had other plans. A different sound cut the air. No longer savage barks, but the powerful neigh of a horse. And then, as if it had sprung from a fairy tale, a majestic white horse leaped over the fence of the neighboring property, positioning itself between the girl and the approaching beast. Time seemed to stop, and Edward felt his world begin to crumble. The white horse rose on its hind legs, its silver mane floating like silk in the wind, letting out a whinny that echoed through the fields like a war cry. Its flared nostrils expelled steam, and its dark eyes fixed on the ferocious dog with a determination that made the beast hesitate for the first time since it began its deadly sprint. Sophia huddled behind the powerful legs of her unexpected protector, her small hands trembling. As she clung to the animal's silky coat, the horse lowered its head, gently touching the girl's face with its velvety muzzle, as if to reassure her that she was now safe. The guard dog, confused by the unexpected intervention, growled low, still baring its saliva-dripping fangs. But something in the horse's majestic posture made it retreat a few steps. It was as if it recognized a superior force, a nobility that its wild nature dared not challenge directly. From the veranda, Edward clenched his fists, his jaw tightening into a hard line of frustration. His carefully laid plans were unraveling before his eyes, and all because of an animal that shouldn't even be there. He descended the mansion steps, with quick strides, putting on a performance of feigned concern worthy of an experienced actor. "My God, what's happening here?" he shouted, running toward the field. Rex, get back here immediately." But the dog, still mesmerized by the horse's imposing presence, did not obey the commands. Its primal instincts battled against years of training, creating a confusion that left it paralyzed between aggression and submission. It was then that another man appeared, vaulting the fence with the agility of someone who knew every stone of that land. Michael Davis, 52, his face weathered by the sun and his hands calloused from honest work, ran toward his horse with a mixture of concern and admiration. "Tempest! What are you doing over here, my friend?" he called, his voice filled with genuine affection for the animal. The horse neighed softly upon hearing the familiar voice, but didn't move from its protective stance. It was as if it instinctively knew its presence was needed there, that this child needed its protection more than anything in the world. Mike approached slowly, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of the scene. The girl hidden behind, the horse, the dog still in an attack stance, Edward approaching with an expression that couldn't completely hide his irritation. Something wasn't right here, and his veteran rancher's instincts were screaming danger. "Sorry for the intrusion," Mike said, addressing Edward with a courtesy that masked his growing suspicion. "Tempest has never done this before. He's a very disciplined animal." Edward forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry about it, neighbor. Accidents happen. But now I need to handle the situation with my dog. Rex is clearly agitated and might hurt someone." The words sounded like a veiled threat, and Mike felt a shiver run down his spine. He looked at the girl, noticing how she flinched whenever Edward spoke, as if his voice were a trigger for some deep, primal fear. "And this little princess?" Mike asked, kneeling beside Sophia. "Are you okay, honey? You're not hurt?" Sophia looked up, and Mike was shocked by what he saw. It wasn't just fear. It was pure terror, the kind that only appears when a child can't distinguish between protection and danger in her own home. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. "She's shy," Edward said quickly, his voice gaining an almost imperceptible hardness. "She doesn't usually talk to strangers. Sophia, go on home now. Carmen should be back soon." But Sophia didn't move. Instead, she clung even tighter to Tempest's mane, as if the horse were her only salvation in a world that suddenly seemed far too dangerous. Mike watched this silent interaction with growing unease. 40 years of raising animals had taught him that horses are mirrors of the human soul. They sense what often escapes human perception. And Tempest was clearly protecting this girl from something it perceived as a real threat. "Maybe I should take Tempest back," Mike said, but he made a point of speaking directly to Sophia. "If you ever need anything at all, our ranch is right over there. You just holler and I'll hear you, okay?" Sophia nodded almost imperceptibly, and for the first time since he'd arrived, a small smile touched her lips. Mike felt his heart ache, recognizing in that gesture the silent gratitude of a soul who rarely received kindness. Edward stepped forward, his patience wearing thin. "I appreciate the concern, but I need to resolve this situation. Rex is still agitated." As if reminded of its presence, the dog growled again, but this time directed its aggression toward Mike. Tempest immediately positioned itself between the rancher and the beast, making it clear it would not allow any act of violence while it was there. Mike held Tempest's reins firmly, but his eyes remained fixed on Edward. There was something about that man that awakened all his protective instincts, something that made him want to stay and ensure the girl was truly safe. But for now, all he could do was plant a seed of hope in Sophia's frightened heart, the certainty that she wasn't completely alone in the world. 3 days passed since the incident in the field, but Mike couldn't get the image of Sophia out of his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that terrified look, the way she had shrunk at the sound of Edward's voice. His fatherly instincts, though he'd never had children of his own, screamed that something was terribly wrong. In the kitchen of his simple but cozy home, Mike talked to his wife Isabel about his worries. A woman with a generous heart and hands always busy. With charity work, she listened attentively as she prepared cookies for a local charity drive. "I can't forget that little girl," Mike confessed, stirring his coffee distractedly. "There was something in her eyes, Isabel, like she was silently crying for help." Isabel stopped mixing the dough and turned to her husband. 48 years of life had taught her to trust his instincts, especially when they involved children. "And what do you plan to do?" Edward Caldwell is a powerful man. People like us don't make accusations lightly against people like him. "They're not accusations," Mike defended himself. "They're observations, and Tempest confirmed my suspicions. You know how sensitive he is to people's energy. I've never seen him so protective of a strange child." Meanwhile, in the cottage at the back of the luxurious estate, Sophia played alone with a worn-out rag doll. Carmen had returned from town with the prescriptions, but had seemed strangely nervous ever since. The elderly governess, who had always been warm and talkative, now whispered prayers under her breath and constantly glanced out the windows. "Carmen," Sophia called in her sweet little voice, "why are you so quiet today?" The woman, in her late 60s, knelt beside the girl, her trembling hands stroking the child's brown hair. Carmen had worked for the Caldwell family for over 20 years, but she had never witnessed anything that disturbed her as much as the events of the last few days. "My little one," she whispered, checking once more to make sure no one was listening. "You need to be very careful indeed." Sophia tilted her head, confused by the seriousness in the governess's voice. "Careful of what, Carmen?" Carmen hesitated, torn between her desire to protect the child and her fear of the consequences. She knew things she shouldn't know, had seen things that made her question her own sanity. The accident with the dog had been no accident at all. Of everything, my dear, especially when you're playing outside. If you see Rex is out of his kennel, you run inside immediately. In the main mansion, Edward paced his office, the phone glued to his ear. His conversation was low, almost a whisper, but the anger in his voice was unmistakable. "I don't pay you for incompetence," he snarled at the person on the other end of the line. "It was supposed to be quick and final. Now I have a nosy neighbor asking inconvenient questions." Helena, his wife, entered the office without knocking. At 35, she maintained an artificial beauty preserved by expensive treatments, but her green eyes were as cold as ice. She wore a designer dress that cost more than most people earned in a year. "Still talking about that complication?" she asked, her contempt palpable. Edward hung up the phone abruptly. "Helena, not now. I'm handling the situation. You're taking too long to handle it," she replied, adjusting the pearl necklace at her throat. "My patience has its limits, Edward. You promised this would be resolved before the wedding. It's been 6 months." The tension in the air was thick. Edward knew Helena wasn't making empty threats. She came from a family even more influential than his, and her social approval was crucial for his business. Losing Helena would also mean losing important contracts and political connections. "It will be resolved," he assured her, but his voice sounded less confident than he would have liked. That afternoon, Mike decided to take a walk along the edge of his property, secretly hoping for another chance to see Sophia. Tempest accompanied him, and the horse seemed equally restless, as if it also sensed that something was amiss. That's when they heard the music. A childish voice hummed a sad song, filled with a melancholy that shouldn't exist in someone so young. Mike followed the sound until he found Sophia sitting alone under a tree, on the boundary between the two properties. "Hello there, little one," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. Sophia looked up, and for the first time, Mike saw a genuine smile light up her face. "It's the man with the pretty horse," she exclaimed, getting up and running toward Tempest. The horse lowered its head, allowing her to stroke its muzzle. The connection between them was almost magical, as if they spoke a language only they understood. "You like horses?" Mike asked, watching the interaction closely. "I love horses," Sophia replied, her eyes shining with a rare joy. "They're kind, and they don't yell at me." The sentence hit Mike like a punch to the gut. Normal children didn't make that distinction between kindness and yelling as if it was something extraordinary. They expected kindness as a matter of course. "Does someone yell at you, Sophia?" he asked gently. The girl's smile vanished instantly, and she once again wore that frightened look that troubled him so much. "I'm not allowed to talk about it," she whispered, glancing nervously toward the mansion. Mike felt his heart clench. At that moment, he was absolutely certain that Sophia was in danger and that he might be the only person in the world who cared enough to do something about it. "Sophia," he said, kneeling to be at her eye level, "if you ever need help, any kind of help, you can count on me. I promise." The girl looked at him for a long moment, as if gauging whether she could trust him. Then, very slowly, she extended her small hand and touched Mike's calloused one. It was at that moment that Edward appeared, striding from the mansion with a furious expression. Edward approached with a forced smile plastered on his face, but his eyes burned with restrained anger. Every step he took seemed calculated, measured, like a predator closing in on its prey without wanting to alert it to its true intentions. "Mike, what a surprise to see you here again," he said, his voice dripping with an artificial cordiality that fooled no one. "Sophia, what are you doing out here? Carmen must be worried." The change in Sophia was instantaneous. The girl who seconds before was smiling and petting Tempest now shrank like a flower withering at the first touch of frost. Her little hands trembled and she hid behind Mike's legs, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by either man. Mike felt a wave of protectiveness wash over him. The child's reaction confirmed all his darkest suspicions. "We were just talking," he said, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Sophia was telling me how much she likes horses." "Sophia has a very active imagination," Edward replied, reaching for the girl with a gesture that looked affectionate to a casual observer, but which made the child recoil even further. "Sometimes she mixes up reality and fantasy. Isn't that right, honey?" The word honey sounded foreign on his lips, like a term he was still learning to pronounce. Mike noticed how Sophia flinched upon hearing it, as if the word carried more weight than affection. "She seems very lucid to me," Mike observed, his hand landing naturally on Sophia's shoulder in a protective gesture. "Kids tend to be more honest than adults." The comment hit Edward like a well-aimed arrow. His eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second before the mask of civility was back in place. Of course. But you know how it is. Children need structure, discipline. They can't just be wandering around without supervision." "Supervision is one thing," Mike said slowly. "Protection is another. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Tempest, sensing the negative energy emanating from Edward, began to grow restless, pawing the ground and snorting softly. The horse positioned itself between Edward and Sophia, creating a subtle but effective physical barrier. Edward noticed the movement, and his irritation grew. That animal was becoming a bigger problem than he had imagined. "Your horse seems agitated," he commented, his voice gaining an almost imperceptible edge. "I hope it's not dangerous." "Tempest only gets agitated when he senses a threat," Mike replied, his eyes fixed on Edward's face. "Animals have a keen instinct for detecting danger." The words hung in the air like an unstated accusation. Edward felt his self-control being tested to its limits. Every fiber of his being wanted to get rid of this meddling rancher, but he knew any rash action would only heighten suspicion. "Sophia," he said, his voice taking on a tone of command that made the girl tremble visibly. "Go home now. Carmen is waiting for you for dinner." Sophia looked at Mike with pleading eyes, as if begging not to have to go. The rancher felt his heart break at seeing so much fear in someone so small and innocent. "Go on, sweetie," he said softly, kneeling, to meet her gaze. "But remember what I said. If you need anything, I'll be here." Sophia nodded timidly and started walking toward the cottage, but she stopped and turned back. "Hey, Mr. Mike," she called out in her sweet voice, "can Tempest come visit me again?" Before Mike could answer, Edward intervened. "Sophia, horses are large animals and can be dangerous. It's best you keep your distance." The irony of the situation was not lost on Mike. The man who had accidentally unleashed a ferocious dog was now concerned about the girl's safety near a gentle horse. "Tempest is very gentle," Mike said, completely ignoring Edward and speaking directly to Sophia. "Good horses know when to protect special people." Sophia smiled for the first time since Edward had appeared and ran inside the house. The two men were left alone, and the facade of civility finally began to crack. "Look, Mike," Edward said, his voice losing all pretense of cordiality. "I appreciate your concern, but Sophia is my responsibility. I know what's best for her." "Responsibility," Mike repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a question. It's interesting how that word can have such different meanings for different people. Edward took a step forward, invading Mike's personal space in a clear show of intimidation. "I don't know what you're implying, but I suggest you be careful. Sometimes overly curious neighbors can get themselves into trouble they can't handle. Mike didn't back down an inch. 40 years of working with large animals and even larger men had taught him that showing fear was the first step to being dominated. "And sometimes," he replied, his voice low but firm, "overly silent neighbors discover they had more strength than they ever imagined." Edward studied Mike's face for a long moment, trying to gauge just how far this man was willing to go. There was something in the rancher's posture that deeply unnerved him, an unshakable resolve that suggested he wouldn't be easily intimidated or bought. "I hope we can continue to be good neighbors," Edward said finally, his voice laced with a veiled threat. "I hope so too," Mike replied, "especially for the little ones who depend on the kindness of adults to survive." Edward turned and started walking back to the mansion, but stopped after a few paces. "By the way, Mike," he said without turning around, "it would be a shame if something happened to your horse. Animals that stray from their territory sometimes run into accidents." The threat was crystal clear. Mike felt a cold fury settle in his chest, but kept his voice controlled. "It would be a shame indeed," he agreed, "especially since Tempest has an excellent memory. Horses never forget the faces or voices of people who pose a danger." Edward finally turned, and for the first time Mike saw the real man behind the mask, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of any normal human feeling. It was like looking into the eyes of a predator that sees other people merely as obstacles to be removed. In that moment, Mike knew that the battle for Sophia's soul had officially begun. Dark clouds gathered in the sky overnight, and when the sun tried to rise, it found only a grey blanket that turned the day into a melancholy extension of the night. The rain began to fall in heavy drops, each one seeming to carry the weight of Sophia's unshed tears. In the cottage out back, the girl woke to the sound of thunder echoing across the fields. Carmen was still asleep in the next room, exhausted from the stressful days she had endured. Sophia got up silently and walked to the window, pressing her small face against the cold glass as she watched the raindrops trace paths like tears down the surface. She thought of Mike and Tempest, of the feeling of safety she had felt in their presence. It was the first time in a long time that someone had looked at her with genuine kindness, without that expression of annoyance she always saw in adults' eyes when they thought she wasn't watching. A movement in the mansion window caught her attention. Edward was there, watching her through the curtains. Even from a distance, she could feel the weight of his gaze, cold and calculating like the eyes of a snake before it strikes. Sophia quickly backed away from the window, her little heart pounding with fear. In the mansion, Edward lowered the curtain with a cruel smile on his lips. The rain would be perfect for his plans. Accidents happened more frequently on rainy days. Slippery ground, reduced visibility. So many plausible explanations for unexpected tragedies. Helena came down the stairs in an imported silk robe, her hair perfectly styled, even though she had just woken up. "Perfect weather for dealing with pending issues," she commented, looking out the window with an expression of morbid satisfaction. "Exactly what I was thinking," Edward agreed, pouring himself coffee into a fine porcelain cup. "Children can be so careless on rainy days." On the other side of the dividing fence, Mike also watched the storm, but his concerns were entirely different. Tempest was restless in the stable, pacing in circles and neighing softly, as if sensing that something bad was about to happen. Isabel approached her husband, bringing him a cup of hot coffee. "You didn't sleep at all last night," she observed, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "You're thinking about that girl again." Mike nodded, seeing no reason to hide his worries from his wife. "I can't get her out of my head, Isabel. There's something very wrong happening in that house, and I feel helpless to do anything." "Maybe it's time to talk to the authorities," Isabel suggested gently, "if your suspicions are correct." "Suspicions aren't proof," Mike interrupted with frustration. Edward Caldwell is a rich and powerful man. Who's going to believe the word of a rancher against his? The rain intensified, turning the fields into a sea of mud. In the cottage, Sophia played alone with her rag doll, making up stories where white horses saved princesses from evil dragons. It was her way of coping with a reality she couldn't fully comprehend. Carmen woke to the sound of the storm and found Sophia sitting on the living room floor, humming softly to her doll. The governess's heart ached to see so much loneliness in someone so small. "Good morning, my little one," she said, sitting beside Sophia. "What story are you telling your doll today?" "It's about a magic horse that protects a girl from a mean monster," Sophia answered with the innocence only children possess. "The horse is very brave and never lets the monster hurt the girl." Carmen felt tears sting her eyes. The child was processing her fears through fantasy, creating a world where protection was possible and good always triumphed over evil. "And how does the story end?" Carmen asked, her voice thick with emotion. "The horse takes the girl to a safe place where she can play without being afraid," Sophia said, hugging her doll tightly. "And they live happily ever after." At that moment, a sharp knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Carmen rose slowly, her stomach churning with anxiety. She opened the door to find Edward standing in the rain, his expensive clothes soaked, but his face maintaining that cold expression she had learned to fear. "I need to speak with Sophia," he said, entering without waiting for permission. "Alone." Carmen hesitated, all her instincts screaming that this was wrong. "Mr. Caldwell, perhaps it would be better to wait for the rain to stop." "Now," he cut her off, his voice laced with authority. "And you can go check for leaks in the mansion. Helena is complaining about noises in the attic." It was clearly an excuse to get her away, and Carmen knew it. But she also knew that openly defying Edward could have terrible consequences for her, and even worse, for Sophia. "I'll get an umbrella," she muttered, casting a worried glance at Sophia before leaving. Once they were alone, Edward approached Sophia with slow, deliberate steps. The girl cowered in the corner of the room, clutching her doll as if it were a shield against the approaching evil. "Sophia," he said, his voice taking on a falsely sweet tone that was even more terrifying than his yelling. "We need to talk about your new friend." "I didn't do anything wrong," Sophia whispered, her voice so low it was barely audible. "Of course you didn't," Edward agreed, kneeling beside her. "But sometimes, even when we don't do anything wrong, bad things can happen, especially to people who stick their noses where they don't belong." Sophia didn't fully understand the words, but she perfectly understood the implied threat. Tears began to stream down her cheeks, mingling with the sound of the rain beating against the windows. "Your friend Mike has a very beautiful horse," Edward continued, his voice maintaining that dangerously soft tone. "It would be a shame if something happened to it. Horses can be so vulnerable on rainy days." The threat was crystal clear, even to a 6-year-old mind. Sophia understood that any contact with Mike could result in something terrible happening to Tempest, and she couldn't allow her protector to get hurt because of her. "You're a smart girl," Edward said, standing up. "I'm sure you'll make the right choice." He headed for the door, but paused before leaving. "Oh, and Sophia," he added, without turning to look at her. "Remember that accidents can happen to anyone, even to elderly governesses who talk too much." With those words, he left, leaving Sophia alone with her fears and tears. The girl huddled in the corner of the room, clutching her doll tightly as the rain continued to fall outside, washing the world but failing to cleanse the evil that inhabited that place. In that moment, Sophia made a decision that shattered her little heart. She had to stay away from Mike and Tempest to protect them, even if it meant being completely alone in the world. The days following the terrifying conversation with Edward were the longest and loneliest of Sophia's life. The girl who once ran through the fields with the natural joy of childhood now remained secluded in the cottage, avoiding any place where she might be seen from the neighboring property. Carmen noticed the change immediately. Sophia had become a shadow of her former self, speaking only when absolutely necessary and losing the sparkle in her eyes that had always defined her. The governess tried to talk to the girl several times, but Sophia would just shake her head and turn away, as if carrying a secret too terrible to share. On the other side of the fence, Mike also noticed the absence. For 3 days in a row, he walked the perimeter of his property, hoping to see Sophia playing in the fields, but she had simply vanished from sight. Tempest seemed equally restless, neighing in the direction of the neighboring estate and trying to jump the fence whenever Mike relaxed his guard. "She's gone," Mike said to Isabel over dinner, his concern evident in every word. "I haven't seen a sign of her in 3 days." Isabel put her fork down, studying her husband's anguished face. "Maybe the family went on a trip. Rich people do that all the time." "No." Mike shook his head with certainty. "I saw Edward on the veranda last night. He was just standing there, watching the fields as if he were looking for something, or someone." Mike's intuition was correct. Edward spent hours watching from the windows, waiting for Sophia to eventually appear so he could monitor her movements. He knew he had planted seeds of deep fear in the child's heart, but he needed to be sure the message had been fully understood. Helena joined him on the veranda that evening, a glass of wine in her hand and a cruel look of satisfaction on her face. "The little complication seems to have learned her lesson," she commented, observing the silent cottage at the back of the property. "For now," Edward replied cautiously. "Children can be unpredictable, and we still have the problem of the meddling neighbor." "Michael Davis," Helena said, pronouncing the name as if it was something unpleasant she needed to spit out. "A simple rancher can't pose a real threat to us." Edward wasn't so sure. There was something in Mike's determination that bothered him deeply. The man didn't seem intimidated by wealth or social standing, and that made him dangerous in a way Edward wasn't used to dealing with. In the cottage, Sophia hid behind the curtains when she saw the figures on the mansion's veranda. Even from a distance, she could feel the weight of their gazes, and it made her tremble with fear. She had spent the last few days making up excuses not to leave the house, faking headaches and stomach aches to avoid playing in the yard. Carmen knew something was terribly wrong, but all her attempts to talk to Sophia were thwarted. The girl had closed herself off like a flower folding at the first sign of a storm. "My little one," Carmen tried again, kneeling beside Sophia, who was mechanically playing with her doll. "You know you can talk to me about anything, don't you?" Sophia looked up, and Carmen was shocked by what she saw. It was no longer the frightened look of a confused child. It was the look of someone who had seen the true face of evil and knew she was completely helpless against it. "I can't talk," Sophia whispered, her voice heavy with a burden no child should have to carry. "If I talk, bad things will happen to the people I like." Carmen felt the blood run cold in her veins. Those words confirmed her worst suspicions about what Edward had said to the girl during their private conversation. "Sophia, listen carefully," Carmen said, gently holding the child's small hands. "Sometimes adults say things to scare us, but that doesn't mean they'll actually happen." "He wasn't lying," Sophia replied, with a certainty that broke Carmen's heart. "He can make bad things happen. I know he can." The governess understood in that moment that she was facing a situation far more serious than she had imagined. Sophia wasn't just scared, she had been systematically terrorized to ensure her silence. That night, Mike decided to take action. He could no longer bear the uncertainty about Sophia's well-being. He waited until darkness enveloped the fields, then walked silently to the fence that divided the two properties. The cottage was dimly lit, and through the window, He could see Carmen sitting alone in the kitchen, her worried expression evident even from a distance. There was no sign of Sophia, which only increased his apprehension. Mike whistled softly, a sound he had taught Tempest to recognize as a special call. The horse approached silently, its hooves making little noise on the damp grass. "What do you think, buddy?" Mike whispered, stroking Tempest's neck. "Something is very wrong over there." As if understanding his owner's concerns perfectly, Tempest looked toward the cottage and let out a low, mournful whinny. It was a sound Mike had never heard before, not anger or excitement, but something that sounded suspiciously like sadness. Suddenly, a small curtain moved in the cottage window. For a fraction of a second, Mike saw Sophia's small face appear, her eyes wide with surprise at the sight of Tempest. But as soon as their gazes met, she disappeared quickly, as if she had seen something that frightened her. Mike felt his heart sink. Sophia's reaction confirmed that something terrible had happened. The girl who once ran joyfully toward Tempest now hid from him, as if his presence represented danger. "She's scared," Mike murmured, the realization hitting him like a punch to the stomach. "Someone taught her to be afraid of us." Tempest snorted softly, as if agreeing with his owner's analysis. The horse moved closer to the fence, as if trying to somehow convey to Sophia that she was still safe with them. But Sophia did not return to the window. Instead, Mike saw Carmen get up and walk to the girl's room, probably to check why she had cried out. The governess appeared at the window moments later, her eyes meeting Mike's across the darkness. For a long moment, the two looked at each other in silence. Carmen gave an almost imperceptible nod, as if confirming Mike's suspicions. Then she pointed discreetly toward the mansion and shook her head, a clear warning about the danger watching from that direction. Mike understood the message. Carmen was trying to tell him that Sophia was in danger, but that any attempt to help could make the situation even worse. He nodded slowly, showing he understood, and then moved away with Tempest. But as he walked back to his house, a steely determination settled in his chest. Sophia was clearly being held prisoner by her own fear, and that was something he could not allow to continue. It was time to find a way to help her, even if it meant confronting Edward Caldwell directly. The dawn of the seventh day brought a thick fog that enveloped the fields like a shroud of mystery. Carmen woke with a decision that had formed in her heart during a sleepless night of prayer and reflection. She could no longer stand by passively while Sophia withered under the weight of the terror Edward had implanted in her childish soul. The governess prepared breakfast with trembling hands, watching as Sophia pushed food around her plate without eating. The girl had lost weight in recent days, and the dark circles under her eyes were clear evidence of sleepless nights, populated by nightmares she dared not share. "Sophia, my dear," Carmen said softly, "you need to eat something. Your little body needs energy." Sophia looked up, and Carmen saw something that made her make her final decision. It wasn't just fear. It was resignation. The child had surrendered to a fate she believed was inevitable, and that was something Carmen could not allow. After Sophia returned to her room, Carmen took a step she knew could cost her her job, her safety, and possibly much more. She walked to the dividing fence at the exact moment Mike was making his morning rounds with Tempest. "Mr. Davis," she called in a low voice, looking nervously behind her to ensure she wasn't being watched. "I need to speak with you." Mike approached immediately, noticing the desperation in the elderly woman's voice. "Carmen, what's happened? How is Sophia?" She's dying on the inside," Carmen said, her words heavy with a profound sadness. "And I can't stay silent any longer, knowing I have the power to help." The next words that came from Carmen's mouth changed everything. "The dog attack was no accident," she confessed, her hands trembling as she gripped the fence. I saw Edward tamper with the kennel latch moments before. He wanted the animal to attack Sophia. Mike felt the world spin. Although his suspicions were confirmed, hearing the truth spoken aloud was like a punch to the gut. "My God," he whispered. "Why? Why would he do that to his own daughter?" "Because she was never supposed to exist," Carmen replied, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "She's the daughter of a previous relationship before his marriage to Helena. The new wife made it clear she wouldn't tolerate reminders of the past in her perfect life." The revelation hit Mike like a lightning bolt. Sophia wasn't just a neglected child, she was seen as an obstacle to be removed. And now? What did he do to scare her so badly? Carmen hesitated, fighting against years of training to keep family secrets. But the love she felt for Sophia was greater than any loyalty she might have had to Edward. "He threatened to hurt you and your horse if she continued to seek out your friendship," she revealed, "and he threatened me too. Sophia is sacrificing herself to protect the people who made her feel loved for the first time in her life." The nobility in Sophia's young heart, even at 6 years old, left Mike both moved and furious. "We have to get her out of there," he said, his voice firm with determination. "We can't let her keep living in this terror." "It's not that simple," Carmen replied, glancing again toward the mansion. "Edward has power, money, influence. Who's going to believe the word of an elderly governess and a rancher against a respected businessman?" It was then that an unexpected voice joined the conversation. "Perhaps someone who has seen it all up close." They both turned, surprised, to see Helena Caldwell approaching, but this was not the cold, calculating woman Mike had expected. Her eyes were red from crying, and her haughty posture had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like remorse. "Mrs. Caldwell," Carmen stammered, panic evident in her voice. We were just talking about how my husband is trying to kill an innocent child," Helena finished, her voice laced with a bitterness that seemed to come from deep within. "Yes, I know. I've always known." Mike studied the woman's face, trying to determine if this was a trap or a genuine change of heart. "If you knew, why didn't you do anything to stop it?" Helena closed her eyes, as if the question caused her physical pain. "Because I'm a coward," she admitted. "Because I convinced myself it wasn't my responsibility. Because I chose to turn a blind eye to what was happening to an innocent child." "And what changed?" Mike asked, still wary. "Last night, I saw her," Helena said, her voice breaking. Sophia was at the window, crying silently while hugging a worn-out rag doll. "And I realized she's the same age as my niece, the same age I was when I went through something similar." The confession hung in the air like a painful revelation. Helena had recognized her own childhood trauma mirrored in Sophia's eyes, and it had awakened a humanity she thought she had lost forever. "Edward doesn't know I've discovered his latest plans," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "He thinks I'm away at a spa, but I came back last night. I overheard a phone call that made me realize the dog attack was just the first in a series of planned accidents." Carmen clung to the fence, her legs nearly giving out from the shock. "What else is he planning?" "Something involving the stables," Helena revealed, looking directly at Mike. "He mentioned something about spooked horses and a child being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's planning to use Sophia's connection to Tempest against her." The sinister irony of the situation was not lost on Mike. Edward intended to use Sophia's own love for Tempest as the weapon to destroy her. "We have to act now," Mike said, his mind already racing through possibilities. "But we need evidence. Your word and Carmen's against his might still not be enough." Helena reached into her handbag and pulled out a small digital recorder. "I recorded the phone call," she said, her voice trembling with the magnitude of what she was doing. "There's enough evidence here to destroy Edward, but there's also enough to destroy me, because I knew and did nothing." "Why are you doing this now?" Mike asked, studying the woman's face with a new perspective. "Because that child deserves to have at least one adult fight for her," Helena answered, tears streaming freely down her face. "And because I can't live with the thought that I've become an accomplice to something so monstrous." Carmen approached, Helena with hesitant steps. "What can we do to protect Sophia?" "First, we need to get her out of immediate danger," Helena said, her voice gaining the determination of someone who had finally found her courage. "I have a plan, but it will require all of us to risk everything." Mike looked at Tempest, who had moved closer to the fence and was watching the conversation with almost human interest. "I'm willing to risk everything for her," he said without hesitation. "Me too," Carmen added, her voice firm despite her obvious fear. Helena nodded, and for the first time in years, Mike saw something genuinely human in her eyes. "Then let's save Sophia, and let's make sure Edward can never hurt another child again." The battle for Sophia's soul was about to enter its most dangerous phase. The unlikely alliance of Mike, Carmen, and Helena gathered in the rancher's simple house. An hour later, Isabel watched in astonishment as the wife of the wealthiest man in the county sat at their humble kitchen table, her eyes still red, but her resolve clear in every line of her face. "First, we need to understand exactly what Edward is planning," Helena said, placing the recorder on the table as if it were a bomb about to explode. "The conversation I recorded was with a man named Vince, someone he hires to solve problems discreetly." Mike leaned forward, every muscle in his body tense. "What kind of problems?" Helena took a deep breath before answering. "Edward wants it to look like Sophia was the victim of an accident in the stables, spooked horses, a child in the wrong place. You understand the setup?" Carmen covered her mouth in horror. "When?" "Tomorrow afternoon," Helena revealed, her voice barely hiding the revulsion she felt for her own husband. "He's planned it to coincide with my supposed trip. No one would question a tragic accident while the caring stepmother was away." Isabel, who had remained silent, taking in the gravity of the situation, finally spoke. "Can't we just call the police now? With that recording?" "It's not that simple," Helena interrupted, shaking her head. "Edward has connections at every level of local government. We need more than a recording. We need to get Sophia to safety first, and then build a case he can't contest or influence." Mike studied Helena's face, still processing the woman's dramatic transformation. "Why should we trust you? How do we know this isn't some kind of trap?" The question was harsh but fair. Helena took it without offense, understanding. She had earned that distrust through years of silent complicity. "Because," she said, removing an envelope from her purse, "I brought this." Inside the envelope were documents that made Carmen gasp audibly. A birth certificate, DNA test results, medical records, all proving that Sophia was, legally, Edward Caldwell's daughter. "He never officially registered her," Helena explained. "He kept these documents hidden to avoid legal complications. But if something were to happen to him, Sophia would be his rightful heir. That means getting rid of her isn't just about personal convenience, it's also about money." The revelation added an even more sinister layer to Edward's motives. It wasn't just about maintaining his public image. It was about ensuring his fortune wouldn't be contested in the future. "We have to get her out of there tonight," Mike said, his determination growing with each new piece of information. "We can't wait until tomorrow." "I agree," Helena said, "but it has to be done in a way that Edward doesn't immediately suspect it was planned. If he finds out I'm involved..." Carmen stood up abruptly, an idea forming in her mind. What if Sophia got sick? A stomachache, a fever, something that would justify taking her to the hospital in town. Edward would never allow it, Helena objected. He doesn't want Sophia out of his sight, especially not now. Mike slammed his fist on the table, making everyone jump. Then we have to force his hand, create an emergency he can't ignore or control. Isabel walked to the window, watching Tempest in the pasture. An idea began to form in her mind, dangerous but possibly effective. What if we used Sophia's connection to Tempest, she suggested slowly. What Edward doesn't know is that she isn't afraid of the horse. She's afraid of them hurting the horse because of her. To hurt him. Mike followed his wife's reasoning. If we create a situation where it looks like Tempest is in danger, Sophia would come out of her hiding place to try and protect him, Carmen completed, her eyes shining with understanding. Helena nodded slowly, and in the ensuing chaos, you could officially rescue her. Take her to a safe place while we call the authorities. The plan began to take shape. Mike would pretend that Tempest had been injured and was in agony, making enough noise to alert the entire neighborhood. Sophia, hearing her protector's suffering, would surely try to go to him, giving Mike the opportunity to intercept her away from Edward's surveillance. But what about Edward? Asked Carmen. He won't just let this happen. Leave Edward to me, Helena said, her voice taking on a hardness that surprised everyone. I will confront him with the evidence I've found. I'll keep him busy while you get Sophia to safety. That's dangerous, Mike warned. If he realizes you've betrayed him, then let him realize, Helena retorted with a courage that seemed to surprise even herself. I've lived for too long as a silent accomplice. It's time to face the consequences of my choices. Isabel joined the group around the table. Do you have a safe place to take Sophia? Mike and Isabel exchanged a meaningful look. My sister lives in the state capital, Isabel said. She's a social worker and has experience with child abuse cases. She can help Sophia both legally and emotionally. Perfect, Helena said. And I have contacts in the capital too, lawyers who aren't on Edward's payroll. We can build a solid case against him. Carmen stood up, her determination renewed. When do we do this? Mike glanced at the clock. It was 4 in the afternoon. Tonight, as soon as it gets dark, Edward will likely be distracted with tomorrow's preparations. And if something goes wrong, Carmen asked, her voice betraying the fear they all felt, but no one wanted to admit. Then we improvise, Mike said firmly. But we are not letting Sophia spend another night in that house, knowing it could be her last. Helena carefully put away the documents and the recorder. There's something else you need to know, she said, hesitating before continuing. Edward hired extra security for this week. Men who don't ask questions about what they see or hear. The information added a layer of danger to the plan, but also confirmed the urgency of the situation. Edward was preparing for something final, and they had only a few hours to prevent a tragedy. Then we have to be even more careful, Mike said, looking at each of the faces around the table. But we also have to be brave. Sophia needs to know there are adults in the world willing to fight for her. Carmen held Isabel's hand, then Helena's, until they were all connected in a circle of determination. For Sophia, she said simply. For Sophia, the others repeated in unison. The night would be long, dangerous, and possibly transformative for everyone involved. But for the first time since he had met Sophia, Mike felt a genuine hope that the girl could have a future free from fear. The rescue was about to begin. The darkness enveloped the fields like a protective cloak as Mike began to set the plan in motion. At 8 o'clock, he positioned himself near Tempest's stable, his heart pounding against his chest. Isabel was hidden in the house, ready to make the necessary calls as soon as Sophia was safe. On the other side of the fence, Helena prepared for the most difficult conversation of her life. She had rehearsed every word during the afternoon, but she knew that confronting Edward with the truth would be like provoking a venomous snake. Still, the image of Sophia crying silently at the window gave her the necessary courage. In the back cottage, Carmen followed her normal evening routine, trying to keep Sophia distracted while waiting for the agreed-upon signal. The governess had told a long story about magic horses to the girl, setting the emotional stage for what was about to happen. "Carmen," Sophia said in her sweet little voice, "do you think horses can feel when we're sad?" Carmen's heart ached with the innocence of the question. "I'm sure they can, my little one. Horses have very big hearts, and they know when someone needs protection." Edward was in his office talking on the phone with Vince about the final details of the plan for the next day. His voice was cold and calculating, discussing Sophia's life as if it were a business problem to be solved. "At 3 in the afternoon, he was saying, when the governess is in town, it has to look completely accidental. A curious child in the stables, spooked horses. You know how to make it look convincing." It was at that moment that Helena entered the office without knocking. Edward looked at her in surprise, not expecting her back from her trip. "Helena, I thought you were at the spa until Thursday." "I changed my mind," she said, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk, Edward, about Sophia." Edward's blood ran cold. There was something in Helena's tone he had never heard before, a determination that alerted him to danger. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, trying to keep his voice casual as he discreetly ended the call. Helena placed the recorder on the desk. "I recorded your conversation with Vince last night," she said, watching her husband's face turn pale. "I know everything, Edward. The dog attack, the plans for tomorrow, everything." Outside, Mike heard raised voices coming from the mansion and knew that Helena had initiated her part of the plan. It was time to start the performance. "Tempest!" he yelled, his voice filled with a convincing feigned despair. "No, oh my God, no!" The horse, trained to trust Mike above all else, began to whinny loudly and stomp its hooves on the ground, creating a sound that echoed across the property. To anyone listening, it sounded as if the animal were in agony. In the cottage, Sophia jumped out of bed upon hearing Tempest's sounds. "Carmen! Tempest is hurt!" Carmen feigned surprise and concern. "Oh my goodness, what could have happened? Maybe we should go see if everything's okay." "Please," Sophia begged, tears already streaming down her face. "We have to help Tempest." It was exactly the reaction they had hoped for. The girl's love for Tempest overcame all the fear Edward had planted in her heart. She ran to the door, followed by Carmen, both heading towards the source of the distressing sounds. In the mansion's office, Edward stood up abruptly upon hearing the commotion. "What the hell is going on out there?" "It seems your plan is starting earlier than you expected," Helena said coldly, blocking his path to the door. Edward tried to push past her, but Helena held her ground. "Get out of my way, Helena. I need to see what's happening." "You're not going anywhere," she replied, her voice gaining a strength that surprised them both. "It's over, Edward. You're not hurting another child." Sophia arrived running at the spot where Mike was staging his desperation. Tempest was lying on the ground, appearing to be injured, while Mike knelt beside him, yelling for help. "Tempest!" Sophia cried, running toward the horse without any hesitation. Mike gently intercepted her. "Sophia, thank God you're here. I think he's hurt, but he's very agitated. Only you can calm him down." The girl knelt beside Tempest, her small hands gently stroking the animal's neck. "It's okay, buddy. I'm here." Miraculously, Tempest began to calm down under Sophia's touch, as if her presence had real healing powers. Mike took the moment to whisper to Carmen, "Now, get her to the car." Carmen picked Sophia up with an excuse about getting her away from the danger. Come on, sweetie. We need to give Mr. Davis space to take care of Tempest. But is he going to be okay? Sophia asked, reluctant to leave her friend. He will be, Mike assured her, winking at the girl. And when you come back, he'll be all better. Isabel appeared with the car already running. Everything was happening quickly, but in a coordinated manner. Sophia was placed in the back seat with Carmen, still worried about Tempest, but trusting the adults who were finally protecting her. In the mansion, Edward finally managed to push Helena aside and ran out towards the commotion. But when he arrived, he found only Mike helping Tempest to his feet, seemingly recovered from his injury. "What happened here?" Edward demanded, his eyes frantically searching for Sophia. "Tempest stumbled and hurt himself," Mike explained calmly. "Luckily, it wasn't anything serious." "Where is Sophia?" Edward asked, his voice revealing a growing panic. "Carmen took her inside the house," Mike lied. "The girl got very scared seeing the horse hurt." Edward ran back to the cottage but found it empty. It was then that he understood he had been tricked. He turned back to find Mike, but the rancher and Tempest had disappeared into the darkness. Helena was waiting for him on the mansion's veranda, the recorder still in her hands. "Looking for someone?" she asked ironically. "What did you do?" Edward roared, advancing on her. "What I should have done a long time ago," she replied without backing down. "I protected an innocent child from a monster." Edward stopped, finally realizing the magnitude of what had happened. Sophia had escaped, and with her, all his chances of keeping his secrets buried. "You have no idea what you've just done," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I have a very clear idea," Helena replied. "I finally did the right thing." At that moment, they both heard the sound of approaching sirens in the distance. Isabel had fulfilled her part of the plan, alerting the authorities to the child abuse situation with enough evidence to warrant an immediate investigation. Edward looked at Helena with pure hatred as the handcuffs were placed on his wrists. "You've destroyed everything," he hissed, "everything we built." "We didn't build anything," Helena retorted with a calmness that surprised even herself. "You built an empire based on lies and cruelty, and I finally found the courage to tear it down." The car sped through the night toward the state capital, carrying Sophia away from the nightmare that her life had been. The girl was nestled in Carmen's arms, still processing the night's events, but for the first time in weeks, her eyes did not reflect pure terror. "Carmen," Sophia whispered in her tired little voice, "is Tempest really going to be okay?" "He will be, my little one," Carmen answered, stroking the girl's hair. "And do you know why? Because magic horses like him are always okay when they do good things." Isabel drove carefully, constantly checking the rearview mirror to make sure they weren't being followed. Each mile they put between themselves and the estate seemed to lift an invisible weight she had been carrying since she learned of Sophia's situation. At the sheriff's office in the next county, Helena personally handed over all the evidence she had collected against Edward. The sheriff, an experienced man named Miller, listened with growing disbelief to the recordings and examined the documents. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, studying the woman's face for any sign of falsehood, "are you telling me your own husband was planning to harm a 6-year-old child?" "Not just harm," Helena corrected, her voice firm despite the tears streaming down her face. "He was planning to kill her, and I was a silent accomplice for far too long." The sheriff immediately dispatched a team to the estate. Helena insisted on accompanying the officers, determined to face the consequences of her actions and ensure Edward couldn't manipulate the situation with his usual influence. When the patrol cars arrived at the Caldwell property, they found Edward, frantically trying to burn documents in the backyard. His mask of respectability had completely fallen away, revealing the desperation of a man who knew his crimes were about to be exposed. "Edward Caldwell," announced Sheriff Miller, You're under arrest for attempted murder, child abuse, and conspiracy to commit a felony." Edward looked at Helena with pure hatred as the handcuffs were fastened on his wrists. "You destroyed everything," he hissed. "Everything we built." "We didn't build anything," Helena replied with a calm that surprised even herself. "You built an empire on lies and cruelty, and I finally found the courage to tear it down." In the state capital, Sophia was being examined by doctors specializing in childhood trauma at the hospital where Isabel's sister worked. Dr. Marina Evans, a pediatrician and child abuse specialist, spoke gently to Sophia while performing the necessary exams. "Sophia, you are a very brave little girl," Dr. Evans said, kneeling to be at the child's eye level. "I know these last few weeks have been very scary for you." Sophia nodded shyly, her small hands nervously fiddling with the rag doll Carmen had brought. "The bad man isn't going to hurt me. Anymore?" "No, sweetie," Dr. Evans assured her. "There are a lot of good adults working to make sure you're always safe from now on." Carmen stayed by Sophia's side throughout the process, providing the emotional comfort the girl needed. When the social workers arrived to speak with Sophia, Carmen carefully explained that these people were there to help, not to scare her. Back at the ranch, Mike gave his statement about everything he had observed in recent weeks. Tempest was in the stable, seemingly understanding that his part in the performance had been crucial to saving Sophia. "I've never seen anything like it in 40 years of dealing with animals," Mike told Sheriff Miller. "Tempest knew that little girl was in danger. Animals have an instinct for these things that we humans sometimes lose." The sheriff took down every detail, building a case that would be impossible for Edward to contest, even with all his influence and money. At the hospital, Sophia finally fell asleep in a safe bed, with Carmen sitting beside her like a vigilant guardian. For the first time in weeks, the girl slept without nightmares, her small face relaxing into the peace that only innocent children should know. Dr. Evans spoke with Isabel about the next steps. "Sophia is going to need a lot of psychological support," she explained. "Children who have been through trauma need time and patience to fully recover." "She'll have all the support she needs," Isabel assured her. "Mike and I have already talked about it. If it's possible, we'd like to be considered for her temporary guardianship while the legal situation is resolved." The suggestion brought tears of gratitude to Carmen's eyes. "Sophia loves you both," she said, "especially the bond she has with Tempest. It would be perfect." In the days that followed, the story spread through the region like wildfire. The respected businessman who tried to kill his own daughter, the brave wife who turned him in, the humble rancher and his horse who saved an innocent child. It was a narrative that touched the heart of the entire community. Other employees from the Caldwell estate began to come forward with their own observations about Sophia's treatment. A pattern of neglect and psychological cruelty emerged, painting an even darker picture than initially imagined. Helena cooperated fully with the investigations, providing details about years of abusive behavior she had witnessed but chosen to ignore. Her confession was both an act of redemption and a way to ensure that Edward could never harm another child. "I know I can't undo years of silent complicity," Helena told the sheriff during one of the interviews, "but I can make sure the truth comes out now." Sophia began to show signs of remarkably swift recovery. The natural resilience of children, combined with the safe and loving environment she had finally found, allowed her to start healing her emotional wounds. Carmen decided to move closer to the capital to continue caring for Sophia, unable to imagine her life without the girl who had become like a granddaughter to her. Mike and Isabel began the legal process to become Sophia's temporary guardians, with the full support of the authorities who recognized the crucial role they had played in saving her. And Tempest? The horse became something of a local celebrity. known as the animal that had saved a child. But for those who truly knew him, he was simply a being with a heart big enough to recognize good and evil. Sophia's first week of freedom was coming to an end, and for the first time in her young life, she was surrounded only by people who loved her unconditionally. 2 weeks had passed since the rescue, and Sophia was now officially under the temporary care of Mike and Isabel. The couple's simple house had been transformed into a home full of love, where every corner reflected the special care they had for their new daughter of the heart. The room Isabel had prepared for Sophia was a dream come true. Walls painted in soft shades of pink and yellow, a canopy bed decorated with golden stars, and on the main wall, a hand-painted picture showing a girl hugging a white horse under a starry sky. "Do you like your room, sweetie?" Isabel asked, watching Sophia explore every detail with wide, amazed eyes. "It's the most beautiful room in the whole world," Sophia replied, her voice filled with a joy she hadn't shown in weeks. "And look, it even has a window that shows Tempest." Indeed, the bedroom window offered a perfect view of the pasture where Tempest often played. Mike had planned this intentionally, knowing the connection between Sophia and the horse was fundamental to her emotional recovery. The therapy sessions with Dr. Evans were progressing better than anyone had dared to hope. Sophia had initially been reluctant to talk about her experiences, but the doctor's patience and kindness gradually opened the floodgates of her communication. "Today, Sophia told me about the games Edward used to play with her," Dr. Evans reported to Mike and Isabel after a session. "They weren't real games, but systematic forms of psychological intimidation. It's amazing how such a young child developed such sophisticated survival mechanisms." Isabel held Mike's hand, both fighting the anger they felt imagining what Sophia had endured. "Is she recovering?" Isabel asked, her voice trembling slightly. "She is," Dr. Evans assured them with a genuine smile. "Children are incredibly resilient when placed in safe and loving environments. Sophia is blossoming in a way that is truly inspiring." Carmen visited Sophia every day, bringing homemade cookies and stories that always involved brave horses and happy endings. The governess had found a small apartment in town and a job caring for an elderly family, but her heart remained dedicated to the girl she had helped save. "Carmen," Sophia said during one of these visits, "can you teach Isabel how to make those honey cookies I loved so much?" "Of course, my little one," Carmen replied, her eyes filling with tears of joy. "I'll teach her all the recipes you like, and some new ones too." The transformation in Sophia was visible with each passing day. Her nightmares gradually subsided, replaced by dreams where she flew on winged horses through golden fields. Her appetite returned, and the cheeks that had grown thin from stress began to regain a healthy, childish fullness. But the biggest change was in her eyes. The constant terror had been replaced by curiosity and, most importantly, the ability to trust the adults around her again. Helena had moved to the state capital, where she volunteered at shelters for child abuse victims. Her personal transformation was as dramatic as Sophia's. The cold, calculating woman had become a passionate advocate for children's rights. "I want to dedicate the rest of my life to ensuring no child goes through what Sophia went through," she said during one of her visits to the couple. "It's the only way I know to try and atone for the years I turned a blind eye to her suffering." Sophia had initially been nervous seeing Helena, but she gradually understood that the woman had truly changed. During a delicate conversation mediated by Dr. Evans, Helena asked Sophia for forgiveness for not acting sooner. "Can you forgive me for not being brave when I should have been?" Helena asked, tears streaming down her face. Sophia thought for a long moment, her childish wisdom processing complex concepts of forgiveness and redemption. "You helped me in the end," she said simply. "That's what matters." The legal case against Edward was moving forward quickly, with The evidence provided by Helena, the statements from Mike and Carmen, and Sophia's own testimony given in a gentle, protected manner, the case was practically airtight. Edward's lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding and that the recording had been taken out of context, but the quantity and quality of the evidence made this defense unviable. Edward is going to spend a long time in prison, Sheriff Miller informed them during a meeting with Mike and Isabel. And even when he gets out, he will have lost all rights to Sophia and most of his fortune through civil lawsuits. Sophia was playing in the yard when she heard the news about the trial. Her reaction surprised everyone. Instead of relief or joy, she showed a deep sadness. "Why are you sad, sweetie?" Mike asked, kneeling beside her. "Because he was my dad," Sophia answered with a maturity that broke Mike's heart. "And even when dads are bad, they're still your dads." Dr. Evans later explained that this reaction was completely normal and healthy. Sophia is processing the loss of the fantasy every child has about their parents. She's mourning not the man Edward was, but the father he should have been. With the support of everyone around her, Sophia gradually worked through these complex feelings. Mike and Isabel didn't try to replace the father figure Edward should have been, but they offered something far more valuable: unconditional love and absolute security. Sophia's connection with Tempest continued to be a constant source of healing. Every day, she spent at least an hour with the horse, brushing his coat, talking about her feelings, and simply enjoying the quiet companionship of her first protector. "Tempest understands me without needing words," Sophia explained to Dr. Evans during a session. "He knows when I'm sad and comes to comfort me, and when I'm happy, he plays with me." Mike had started teaching Sophia to ride, always with careful supervision and safety gear, seeing the girl galloping through the fields on Tempest, laughing, with the pure joy of freedom, was one of the most moving experiences he had ever had. Isabel documented every special moment with photographs, creating an album that told the story of Sophia's recovery. It was a visual narrative of hope, showing how a traumatized child could flourish when surrounded by the right kind of love. "One day, when you're older," Isabel said to Sophia as they looked through the album together, "you'll look at these pictures and remember how strong and brave you were." Sophia studied a photo where she was laughing while hugging Tempest. "Was I really brave?" she asked. "You were the bravest person I've ever met," Isabel answered with complete sincerity. "And you still are every day." The night was ending on Sophia's second week in her new home, and for the first time in her life, she fell asleep with the absolute certainty that she would wake up safe, loved, and protected. The sun rose golden on that Tuesday morning, but for Sophia, the day carried a special weight she didn't yet fully understand. It was the day of Edward's sentencing, and although Dr. Evans had carefully explained that she wouldn't have to face the man who had tried to hurt her, the girl felt a deep unease in her heart. Mike adjusted his borrowed tie for the third time, his trembling fingers revealing the tension he was trying to hide from Sophia. Isabel brushed the girl's hair with gentle strokes, whispering reassuring words while Carmen prepared a special breakfast in the kitchen. "My little warrior," Isabel said, kissing the top of Sophia's head. "Today is an important day, but you are safe. Nothing can hurt you anymore." Sophia nodded, but her eyes reflected a maturity no 6-year-old should possess. "Is he going to jail forever?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mike knelt by the bed, gently holding Sophia's small hands. "He's going to a place where he can't hurt anyone anymore," he explained carefully, "and you never have to be afraid of him again." The county courthouse was swarming with reporters and onlookers when the group arrived. The story of the girl saved by a horse had captured the region's imagination, turning the case into a symbol of the struggle between innocence and evil, Dr. Evans was waiting at the entrance, along with the district attorney, a serious man named Mr. Grant, who had worked tirelessly to ensure all evidence was presented irrefutably. "Sophia will not have to testify in person," Mr. Grant assured the group. "We have more than enough evidence, and her deposition has already been videotaped in a controlled environment." Carmen held Sophia's hand as they walked through the courthouse corridors. The governess had become a constant source of strength for the girl, representing continuity in a world that had changed dramatically. In the courtroom, Edward sat next to his lawyers, his expensive suit unable to hide the moral decay he had suffered in recent weeks. When his eyes met Helena's in the witness box, something like remorse briefly flickered across his face. Helena was radiant in her transformation. Dressed with simplicity but dignity, she rose to give her final testimony with a determination that impressed even her critics. "Members of the jury," she began, her voice clear and firm, "for years I convinced myself it wasn't my responsibility to protect Sophia. I told myself there was nothing I could do, that it wasn't my place to question my husband's actions. The silence in the room was absolute, each of Helena's words echoing like a painful but necessary confession. But the truth is, I chose not to see, I chose not to act, and an innocent child almost paid for my cowardice with her life." Tears streamed freely down her face. "I can't undo the past, but I can ensure that justice is served now." Mike testified next, describing not only the events he had witnessed, but also the extraordinary transformation of Sophia since she had been safe. "Sophia isn't just a survivor," he said, looking directly at the jury. "She is an inspiration. A 6-year-old girl who found the strength to forgive, the courage to trust again, and enough love in her heart to worry about the well-being of the very man who tried to destroy her." Carmen was next, her voice thick with emotion as she recounted the 20 years she had worked for the Caldwell family and the gradual changes she had observed in Edward's behavior toward Sophia. "I should have spoken up sooner," she confessed. "But I was afraid of losing my job, afraid of not being believed, afraid of the consequences. But my biggest regret is not being brave enough to protect Sophia when she needed it most." The prosecutor then presented the physical evidence, Helena's recordings, the documents proving Sophia's paternity, the medical records showing a pattern of neglect, and the video testimony of Sophia herself. When Sophia's video was played in the room, a reverent silence fell over the courtroom, her childish voice describing Edward's scary games, her attempts to hide to avoid his anger, and her gratitude for the adults who finally protected her, touched even the hardest of hearts. Edward listened to it all in silence, his face a mask of defeat. His lawyers had exhausted every defense strategy, and the evidence was simply irrefutable. During a recess, Sophia waited in a special room with Isabel and Dr. Evans. She had asked to draw, and her choice of image surprised everyone. A green field where a little girl flew on a white horse, while shadowy figures were trapped behind bars in the background. "Is this you and Tempest?" Dr. Evans asked, studying the drawing. "Yes," Sophia answered with a smile that lit up her whole face. "And those shadow people can't reach us anymore because we're flying too high." When the trial resumed, it was time for the verdict. The judge, an experienced man who had seen many difficult cases in his career, read the decision in a solemn voice. "Edward Caldwell, this court finds you guilty of attempted murder, child abuse, criminal negligence, and conspiracy to commit a felony. You are hereby sentenced to 20 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 10 years. The gavel fell with a sound that echoed through the room like a thunderclap of justice. Edward was led away in handcuffs, and for the first time since it all began, Sophia was truly free. But the most emotional moment was yet to come. The judge called Sophia forward, and with Isabel's help, she approached the bench. "Sophia," the judge said kindly, "you are a very brave girl. And now I want to make official something that is already true in all our hearts." He held up a legal document. "Michael Davis and Isabel Davis are now officially your adoptive parents. You have a family that loves you unconditionally." Sophia looked at Mike and Isabel, then at Carmen, Helena, and Dr. Evans. All the people who had fought for her were there, smiling through their tears. "Can I call you Mom and Dad?" she asked Mike and Isabel, her voice full of hope. "It would be the greatest honor of our lives," Mike replied, scooping Sophia into his arms as Isabel hugged them both. At that moment, surrounded by the love of her new family, Sophia understood that the nightmares were over forever. The girl, who had been rejected and terrorized, was now surrounded by more love than she had ever dreamed possible. Justice had been done, but more importantly, a child had found her way home. 6 months had passed since the trial, and the transformation in Sophia was so complete it was sometimes hard to believe she was the same terrified girl Mike had found hiding behind Tempest on that fateful day. Autumn painted the fields in golden boughs, and Sophia ran freely among the trees, her crystal-clear laughter echoing like music in the air. The house that once held only Mike and Isabel now pulsed with the vibrant energy of a complete family. The walls were decorated with Sophia's drawings, photos of special moments, and little reminders of the love that had blossomed between them. The girl's room had become her personal sanctuary, filled with books, toys, and a growing collection of drawings that documented her healing journey. In the kitchen, Isabel was teaching Sophia to make cookies, following the recipe Carmen had passed on. The girl was focused, her small hands covered in flour as she tried to shape the cookies with the seriousness of a professional chef. "Mom," Sophia said, using the word that still made her smile every time she said it, "do you think Dad will like the horse-shaped cookies?" "I'm sure he'll love them," Isabel replied, kissing her daughter's forehead, especially since they were made with so much love. Mike walked into the kitchen just then, his boots still dusty from a day working in the fields. His life had changed completely since Sophia arrived, not just the practical aspects of having a child at home, but the way he saw the world. Every small moment of Sophia's joy was a victory against the darkness she had faced. "Something smells delicious in here," he said, hugging Isabel from behind as he watched Sophia work intently. "Sophia is making little horse cookies for you," Isabel explained, "and she has a special surprise to tell you." Sophia turned to Mike, her eyes shining with excitement. "Dad, the teacher said I can be in the school's holiday pageant. I'm going to recite a poem about magic horses." Sophia's integration into the local school had been another important milestone in her recovery. Initially shy and reluctant to interact with other children, she had gradually opened up, making friends and discovering talents she had never had the chance to explore. "That's wonderful, Princess," Mike said, lifting her into his arms. "You're going to do beautifully, and I'm sure Tempest would be very proud." The mention of the horse made Sophia's eyes light up even more. Her connection with Tempest had evolved. From protection to a deep and genuine friendship, she had learned to ride him with confidence, and the two had developed a silent language that impressed even seasoned equestrians. Carmen arrived then for her weekly visit, bringing, as always, a new story and a warm smile. The former governess had become a constant presence in Sophia's life, representing the bridge between her traumatic past and her happy present. "My little star," Carmen said, hugging Sophia tightly. "How was your week at school?" "I made a new friend," Sophia exclaimed. "Her name is Anna, and she likes horses too. Can I invite her over to meet Tempest?" The ease with which Sophia now made friends and trusted new people was a testament to her extraordinary healing. Dr. Evans had explained that resilient children like Sophia could not only recover from trauma, but emerge from it with an even greater capacity for love and trust. Helena was also a regular visitor, though her presence had initially caused some tension. Over time, Sophia had come to understand that Helena had genuinely changed, and their relationship had evolved into something akin to a caring aunt who had made mistakes but found redemption. "Sophia," Helena said during one of her visits, "I wanted to tell you some news. Remember the project I'm helping with for children who have been through difficult situations?" Sophia nodded, always interested in Helena's work with other children who needed help. "Well, we're opening a special center where kids like you can spend time with horses to feel better. And I was thinking, we'd like you and Tempest to be our special ambassadors." The proposal moved Sophia deeply. The idea that her experience could help other children touched something profound in her young but wise heart. "Tempest and I can help other scared kids?" she asked, her eyes full of hope. "Exactly," Helena confirmed. "You can show them that it's possible to be happy again after bad things happen." Mike and Isabel exchanged proud glances. Sophia had found not only healing for her own trauma, but a way to turn her experience into something that could benefit others. Her therapy with Dr. Evans had officially ended the month before, with the doctor declaring that Sophia had not only fully recovered, but had developed an emotional maturity impressive for her age. "Sophia taught me as much as I taught her," Dr. Evans had said in their last session. "Her capacity to forgive, to trust again, to find joy after darkness. She is truly extraordinary." That evening, after Sophia had gone to sleep, Mike and Isabel sat on the porch, watching Tempest graze peacefully in the moonlit field. "Do you regret anything?" Isabel asked, taking her husband's hand. Mike thought for a moment before answering. "I regret not acting sooner, taking too long to trust my instincts about what was happening. But you acted when it mattered most," Isabel reminded him. "And look at the result. Sophia didn't just survive, she flourished." Mike nodded, looking at the house that was now truly complete. "Sometimes I think about what our life was like before she came. We thought we were happy, but we didn't know what we were missing. And now I know that true love isn't something you look for. It's something that finds you when you're willing to open your heart and fight for it." In her room, Sophia slept soundly, her rag doll hugged against her chest. But unlike the first days after the rescue, her sleep was serene, filled with dreams of riding Tempest through endless fields of happiness. On her nightstand was the most recent drawing she had made at school. A family of 4, Mike, Isabel, herself, and Carmen, standing next to a white horse, all smiling under a golden sun. At the top of the page, in her still uncertain but determined handwriting, she had written, "My forever family." Edward was serving his sentence in a distant prison, but he rarely occupied Sophia's thoughts. She had learned that some people choose darkness, but that doesn't mean the light can't win. And in her new life, surrounded by unconditional love and true protection, Sophia had become a source of light herself for everyone around her. The girl who had begun her story hiding behind a protective horse had found not only safety, but also purpose. And as she slept in her safe bed, dreams filled with infinite possibilities and limitless love danced in her mind. A year after the rescue, the fields of Mike and Isabel's ranch were decorated with colorful flowers and festive ribbons. It was the day of the first charity fair for the Tempest Project, the equine therapy center Helena had founded for children who had experienced a trauma, and Sophia was radiant in her light blue dress, ready to be the event's special host. Families from all over the region had come to learn about the project that was transforming lives through the connection between wounded children and gentle horses. Sophia, now 7, walked among the visitors with the confidence of someone who had found her place in the world, telling her story with the precocious wisdom of one who had turned pain into purpose. "This is Tempest," she said to a group of fascinated children, stroking the neck of the horse who had become a local legend. "He taught me that sometimes the best friends show up when we need them most." Tempest stood as still as a statue, allowing the children to touch and hug him. His natural gentleness and intuition for sensing those who needed comfort had made him the perfect therapy horse. Under his calm influence, even the most frightened children found the courage to smile again. Mike watched from a distance, his heart overflowing with pride at how Sophia had become a source of inspiration for other children. Isabel was by his side, documenting every moment with photographs for the ever-thickening album that told their daughter's extraordinary journey. "Who would have thought our shy little girl would become such an eloquent speaker?" Isabel murmured, wiping away a tear of joy. "She always had that strength inside her," Mike replied. "She just needed to feel safe to let it flourish." Carmen was helping organize the event, her experienced hands serving the famous cookies that were now requested at every party in the region. At 70, she had found new energy and purpose in watching Sophia grow and thrive. Carmen, called a small girl who had just arrived at the project that day, "Sophia said you make the best cookies in the world. Is that true?" Carmen knelt to the child's level, recognizing in those frightened eyes an echo of what Sophia had once been. "It is true, honey. And do you know what makes them special? They're made with lots of love and a dash of hope." Helena arrived in the late afternoon, bringing a group of professionals from the state capital who were interested in replicating the project in other regions. Her personal transformation continued to impress everyone. The cold, materialistic woman had become a passionate advocate for children's rights. "Sophia," Helena said, approaching the girl who was helping a new child brush Tempest, "I'd like you to meet some very important people. They want to create projects like this in other cities." Sophia looked at the elegantly dressed people accompanying Helena, her natural shyness warring with her desire to help more children. "Are you going to have magic horses like Tempest too?" she asked. One of the visitors, a doctor specializing in childhood trauma, knelt to talk to Sophia. "We hope to find special horses like Tempest, but what we really need are brave girls like you to teach us how the magic happens." The event continued until sunset, with riding demonstrations, presentations on the benefits of equine therapy, and emotional testimonials from families who had already been helped by the project. Sophia participated in everything with natural ease, her personal story serving as living proof that full recovery was possible. As the last families were leaving, Dr. Evans arrived for a surprise visit. Although Sophia no longer needed regular therapy, the doctor kept in touch to follow her extraordinary development. "Sophia," Dr. Evans said, hugging her warmly, "you know you're my favorite patient of all time, right?" "Because I got better so fast?" Sophia asked, always curious. "Because you taught me that healing isn't just about forgetting bad things, but about using those experiences to make good things happen," Dr. Evans explained. "You've turned your pain into power to help others." That night, after all the visitors had gone, the family gathered on the porch for their favorite ritual, watching the sunset as Tempest grazed peacefully in the golden field. Sophia was nestled between Mike and Isabel on the porch swing he had built especially for these family moments. Carmen was in her favorite chair, knitting a new sweater for Sophia, and even Helena had stayed for dinner, completing the circle of people who had fought for the girl's salvation. "Dad," Sophia said, breaking the contemplative silence. "Do you remember when I was afraid of everything?" Mike hugged her tighter. "I remember, Princess, but I also remember how brave you were even when you were scared. My teacher says that courage isn't not being afraid, but doing the right thing even when you are afraid," Sophia reflected. "That's what you all did for me." Isabel kissed the top of her daughter's head. And that's what you're doing for other children now. Helena joined the conversation, her voice thick with emotion. Sophia, there's something I've always wanted to ask you. Can you truly forgive me for not protecting you when I should have? Sophia turned to look Helena directly in the eyes, her answer coming from the pure heart of a child who had learned the true meaning of forgiveness. Helena, my mom taught me that making mistakes is human, but trying to fix them is what makes us special. You fixed everything when you helped me get safe, and now you're helping other kids. That's more important than any mistake from the past. Sophia's words brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. The emotional wisdom she had developed continued to surprise the adults around her. As darkness finally enveloped the fields, Sophia went to her room, but before sleeping, she did something that had become a tradition. She wrote a few words in her special diary, documenting the important moments of her journey. "Dear Diary," she wrote in her increasingly firm handwriting, "today, I helped more kids meet magic horses. I think Tempest liked having so many new friends. Helena said we're going to help kids in other cities too. I'm happy because I can turn the bad things that happened to me into good things for other people. Dad and Mom always say I'm special, but I think anyone can be special when they have real love." She closed the diary and lay down, watching Tempest. Through the window as he grazed under the starlight, the horse raised his head as if he felt her gaze and neighed softly, a sound she had learned to interpret as good night. "Good night, my protector," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me and for continuing to save other children with me." In the living room, Mike, Isabel, Carmen, and Helena talked about future plans to expand the project. But they were all united by a deep understanding that they had been part of something much bigger than a simple rescue. They had been instruments of a transformation that would touch lives for generations. "Sometimes I think," Mike said, looking at the photo of Sophia riding Tempest that decorated the wall, "that maybe we didn't save Sophia. Maybe she saved us." "What do you mean?" Helena asked. "She taught us what unconditional love really means," Isabel explained. "She showed us that genuine kindness always wins over evil and that a child can be stronger than any adult when she has the right love to support her." Carmen nodded, her experienced hands still working on her knitting. "Sophia reminded us that we all have white horses inside of us, ready to protect the innocent. We just need the courage to act." In the stillness of that perfect night, with Sophia sleeping safely in her bed and Tempest standing guard in the field, the story that had begun with terror and nearly ended in tragedy found its conclusion in a symphony of love, hope, and redemption. A girl had been saved, but in the process she had saved everyone around her, teaching them that true love has the power to turn even the darkest stories into tales of light and hope. And so, under a starry sky that promised endless possibilities, Sophia Davis slept soundly, knowing she would wake up to another day of adventure, love, and the chance to spread the magic of hope to children who, like she once was, just needed someone to believe in their ability to fly.